everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on Turkey-USA relations, one of the most strategically important, complex, and sometimes turbulent bilateral relationships in modern international politics. Today we will explore how geopolitics, political developments, and economic interests shape ties between Ankara and Washington. Historical foundations. The origins of Turkey and USA relations go back to the early 19th century. The two countries established formal diplomatic relations in 1831, when the Ottoman Empire and the United States signed their first commercial treaty. However, cooperation deepened after World War II. Then Turkey faced security threats from the Soviet Union. According to William Hale's Turkish foreign policy since 1734, Turkey emerged as a classic middle power, strong enough to influence regional affairs, but needing alliances for security in bipolar world. So, in the screen you can see the key milestones. In the 1947, the Truman Doctrine, so the USA provided military and economic aid to Turkey and Greece to counter Soviet pressure. In 1952, Turkey joined NATO, turning into alliances Southeastern Ankara. Cold War. Turkey hosted US bases, radar systems, and nuclear weapons. In this period, Turkey became a vital buffer between the USSR and the Mediterranean. 2. Geopolitical dimensions. This is a backbone of Turkey-USA relations. 2.1 Geography as destiny. Turkey's geography is not just a physical feature, it is the foundation of its entire foreign policy identity. As William Hale emphasizes, Turkey's position as a crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East has consistently given the country strategic weight, uncommon for a middle power. The most critical element of this geography is Turkey's control over the Turkish Straits, the Bosphorus, and the Dardanelles. These narrow waterways connect the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, forming the only maritime access route for Russia, Ukraine, and other Black Sea states to reach global waters. According to Hale, this choke point made Turkey central to the geopolitical calculations of every great power since the 19th century, from Tsarist Russia to NATO strategics. Control over the straits has historically allowed Turkey to influence the regional balance of power, especially through the Monroe Conventions in 1936, which gives Ankara the authority to regulate the passage of watership. This strategic value did not disappear with the end of the Cold War. In fact, it has increased due to new tensions in the Black Sea and Middle East. Today, this geostrategic position underpins several US priorities. First of all, NATO's southern flank. Turkey hosts key NATO assets, including radar system and air bases, vital for deterrence and regional operations. Second, Black Sea security vis-à-vis Russia. Turkey's control of the straits is crucial for restricting Russian naval movements, especially after 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Third, Middle East operations. Proximity to Russia, Iraq, and Iran makes Turkey indispensable for US power projections and intelligence gathering. Fourth, energy transit corridors. Major pipelines from the Caspian and Caucasus cross Turkish territory, supporting Western energy diversification away from Russia. In short, geography makes Turkey impossible for Washington to ignore. No US strategy for Eurasia, whether focused on Russia, Iran, the Mediterranean, or energy security, is workable without Turkish cooperation. 2.2 The Middle East Factor. The Middle East has long been one of the most important arenas for US Turkey cooperation. This collaboration began during the early Cold War when Turkey aligned itself firmly with the Western Bloc and contributes troops to the Korean War, demonstrating its commitment to collective security and strengthening its case for NATO membership. During the 1991 Gulf War, Turkey played a pivotal role by allowing the US to use its air bases and by enforcing UN sanctions against Saddam Hussein. The war also increased Turkey's influence on northern Iraq, so it creates long-term concerns about Kurdish autonomy and issues that would later complicate relations. The 2003 Iraq War marked a turning point. Although Turkey remained a NATO ally, its parliament refused to allow US forces to open a northern front through Turkish territory. This decision reflected domestic opposition, fears of destabilization, and concerns over Kurdish empowerment in Iraq. It creates distrust in Washington and demonstrates that Turkey would not automatically support US actions in the region, especially when its own national security priorities were at stake. Despite these tensions, the Middle East continues to be a core space where American and Turkish interests intersect in counterterrorism, regional stability, and post conflict diplomacy. 2.3 The Kurdish Question. The Turkish issue one of the most enduring and sensitive tensions in US-Turkey relations. Turkey has long fought the PKK, which both Ankara and Washington classify as a terrorist organization. The main disagreement arises in Syria, where the US supports the YPG and ISDF as its most effective partner against ISIS. For Turkey, this is a major security concern. Ankara views the YPG as a Syrian branch of the PKK and believes that US supports for its threatens Turkey's territorial integrity. This divergence affects almost every aspect of the bilateral security agenda, from US arms transfers to Kurdish forces to disputes over American position in northern Syria. 2.4 Russia and balancing. Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 missile system in 2019 creates the most serious rift in decades. The US removed Turkey from the F-35 program. Sanctions were imposed under CAATSA in 2020. Yet Turkey continues to balance between Washington and Moscow, especially in Syria, Ukraine, and energy relations. Since the war in Ukraine, Turkey has sold Bayraktar TB2 drones to Kiev, blocked some Russian naval movements under the Monroe Convention, acted as a mediator in the grain corridor negotiations. This shows Turkey's continued value as a strategic middle power. Third, political relations. So, Part 1 Domestic Politics and Perceptions. Turkish public opinion towards the US has fluctuated. High trust in the 1990s, declining sharply after the 2003 Iraq War, further damaged by US partnership with the YPG and disagreements over Fethullah Gulen's extradition after 2016 failed coup attempt. In US politics, Turkey is often debated as a critical ally, but also a difficult partner due to human rights concerns, democratic backsliding, and divergent Middle East policies. 3.2 NATO cooperation. Despite tensions, Turkey remains essential to NATO, hosts air bases key for US operations, has the second largest army in NATO, played a major role in Afghanistan ISAF missions. Recent developments include Turkey approving Finland and Sweden's NATO membership after negotiations on counterterrorism commitments. 4. Economic relations. 4.1 Trade. As of 2024, bilateral trade exceeds $30-35 billion annually. The US exports aircraft, machinery, cotton, and technology. Turkey exports steel, textile, consumer goods, and automotive parts. Both sides have repeatedly discussed raising trade volume to $100 billion. Services remains aspirational. 4.2 Investment. US companies have invested over 14-15 billion dollars in Turkey. Over 2,000 American firms operate in Turkey. Sectors include energy, manufacturing, digital technologies, and finance. 4.3 Energy Cooperation. Energy is one of the most stable and mutually beneficial areas of Turkey-US cooperation. Turkey's geographic position makes it a key transit hub connecting Caspian, Middle Eastern, and Eastern Mediterranean resources to global markets. Major projects such as the Baku-Tbilisi-Sirhan (BTC), oil pipelines and gas corridors from the Caspian region pass directly through Turkish territory, strengthening its role as an energy bridge. For the United States, Turkey's energy transit capacity is strategically important because it supports efforts to diversify Europe's energy supply away from Russia, reducing Moscow's leverage. Washington has consistently backed Turkish-led or Turkey-supporting projects that promote alternative routes for oil and natural gas, including pipelines from Azerbaijan and potential Eastern Mediterranean energy developments. Overall, energy cooperation reinforces Turkey's importance to U.S. strategic planning and highlights an area where both countries' long-term interests continue to align. In conclusion, Turkey-US relations are complicated but still very important for both sides. There are disagreements such as Syria, the Kurdish issue, and Turkey's ties with Russia. But two countries continue to work together because their interests overlap in many key areas. Turkey's location makes it essential for NATO, Black Sea security, Middle Eastern stability, and energy routes to Europe. The US remains a major partner for Turkey in defense, trade, and regional security. Even when tensions appear, the partnership does not break. Instead, it continues in a practical and flexible way. In the future, Turkey and USA will likely keep cooperating, even if they do not always agree, because both countries need each other to achieve their strategic goals. So, this is the end. Goodbye. See you in the next videos.